Damien Cross walked into his own restaurant that night like a stranger and froze the moment he heard a young waitress sobbing behind a closed door. Nobody in that building knew he was there. Nobody knew what he was about to find out. That was about to change everything. He had done this for years, walking into his own places unannounced, no security, no reservation, sitting down like any other customer off the street, because the truth of a business never lives in the reports. It lives in what people do when they think no one important is watching. Ember was full that Friday night. Candlelight across white tablecloths. The smell of butter and grilled meat drifting soft through the air. Jazz playing low in the background. From the outside, everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to look. But Damien had learned a long time ago never to trust the surface of things. He chose his usual corner seat near the bar, settled in, and let his eyes move slowly across the floor. Old habit, one he couldn't turn off even when he tried, and almost immediately he saw Reed Calloway. The manager stood at the far edge of the dining floor, still, arms folded, watching his staff with a particular kind of stillness that Damien recognized the moment he saw it. There is a difference between a man who watches his staff to guide them and a man who watches them because it reminds him of the power he holds over them. Reed Calloway had the eyes of the second kind, cold, satisfied, the eyes of a man who had found something he could control and intended to keep it that way. Damien's jaw tightened. Something was wrong here. He reached for the menu, kept his expression neutral, but his eyes stayed on Reed a few seconds longer than necessary. Long enough to be certain of what he was seeing. Then he heard it, from somewhere down the hallway near the staff break room. A sound so faint the jazz and the dinner conversation should have buried it completely. But it didn't. A young woman, sobbing. Not the kind of sobbing that wants to be heard. The other kind. Pressed down, swallowed, controlled with everything she had. The kind that only happens when a person has been holding something too heavy for too long and the body simply refuses to hold it anymore. The kind of crying that breaks something in the chest of anyone who truly listens. Damien set the menu down. He rose slowly and moved toward the hallway. The break room door was slightly open. He stopped just outside and looked through the narrow gap. A young woman, both hands gripping the edge of a small table, like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Head bowed, shoulders trembling with the effort of staying quiet. Beside her, a young man in the same Ember uniform, pale pink, slightly wrinkled from a shift that had gone on too long, was leaning close, whispering something urgent, something Damien couldn't make out from where he stood. He didn't need to. The image told him everything. This was something that had been building for a long time, pressing down on her, quietly, day after day, until one night, in a staff break room in the back of a restaurant she probably needed more than she let on. It became too much to carry standing up, and then she lifted her head. The light from the single bulb above caught her face, and Damien Cross went completely still. Her eyes were green, pale and clear, the color of sea glass held up to winter light, red at the edges from crying she had been fighting to hide. Exhausted in a way that went much deeper than one long shift. And something in those eyes, something he could not name and could not explain, reached straight through 15 years and grabbed him somewhere he thought no longer existed. He knew those eyes. He had seen those eyes before. He didn't know how. He didn't know where. Not yet. But the feeling was immediate. Certain. The kind of certainty that has nothing to do with logic. The kind that lives somewhere older than thought. Damien took one slow step back from the doorway. His breathing had changed without him noticing. He turned and walked back to the bar at an unhurried pace, sat down, ordered water, and stayed completely still for a long moment, the way a man does when something has just shifted inside him, and he hasn't yet figured out what to do about it. He wasn't leaving tonight, not until he found out who she was, and why. When he looked into her eyes, he felt the ghost of something he had buried a long time ago come quietly back to life. The young man who had been comforting her came back out to the dining floor a few minutes later. He moved quickly, order pad in hand, but his eyes kept drifting toward the hallway, the way a person does when they've left someone behind that they're still worried about. Damien watched him for a moment. Then he rose from his seat and moved toward the napkin station near the service area. Casual, unhurried, like a man looking for nothing in particular. "Hey!" He stopped beside the young man. "Can I borrow a pen?" The young man turned, startled for just a beat. His name tag read Ryan Park. He handed the pen over with a polite, careful smile. The kind of smile service staff learn to keep ready no matter what is happening behind their eyes. Damien took the pen, but he didn't move away. He looked at Ryan with a calm, even gaze and lowered his voice. "The girl back there, your friend. She doesn't look okay." Ryan went still. His eyes dropped to the floor. "She's fine. Too fast. Too neat." The answer of someone who had already decided what they were and weren't going to say. Damien said nothing, just stood there, patient. Because silence has its own kind of weight, it presses down on people until the space becomes too uncomfortable to leave empty. And Ryan Park, no matter how hard he tried, was not the kind of person who could sit inside that discomfort for long. Her name is Sophie. Ryan let out a slow breath. His voice dropped. "Sophie Hale. She's been here almost 9 months. Best person on this floor. Never complains, never calls in sick, never asks for anything." Damien gave a slight nod. Enough to keep him talking. "But she doesn't have a choice." Ryan's hands tightened around the order pad. Her mom passed away 2 years ago. Cancer. Left behind $140,000 in medical bills. Sophie had to drop out of college, 3rd year, and pick up whatever work she could find. 2 jobs, sometimes 3. Then she came here. He paused, swallowed, and Reed, the manager, he figured out her situation pretty fast. Now he keeps putting her on double shifts, back-to-back nights, overtime that never shows up on her paycheck. She can't say no. She can't push back. Because if she loses this job, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Losing this job meant losing everything. Damien kept his expression steady, but something behind his eyes had gone very quiet. "Is there anything else?" he asked. Ryan opened his mouth and then stopped. His gaze moved past Damien's shoulder and his face went pale in an instant. Damien didn't need to turn around to know who was behind him. He felt the shift in the air, the specific kind of stillness that falls over a room when someone with power walks into it and wants to be felt. "I have to get back," Ryan said quickly, dropping his head, suddenly very focused on the napkins in front of him. "I'm sorry, I can't. I have to go." He slipped away. Damien stayed where he was a moment longer, the borrowed pen still in his hand. Then he turned and walked back to the bar without looking behind him. He already knew Reed Calloway was watching. He could feel it. He sat down. Brennan, brown-haired, steady-handed, polishing a glass with the ease of a man who had been doing it his whole life, stepped closer without changing his expression. To anyone watching, it looked like nothing more than a bartender checking on a customer. "What can I get you?" "Whiskey," Damien said quietly. "Neat." Cal set the glass down and leaned in just enough. His voice dropped below the music. "Reed Calloway, there's something you need to know." Damien took a slow sip. Eyes forward. "Talk." Al kept his hands moving, wiping down the bar, calm and methodical, as though no conversation was happening at all. "He makes calls after his shift. Always goes out to the back alley. Long calls, careful ones. I've tried to get close enough to hear. He's good at making sure nobody does." Damien waited. "There's more." Cal flicked a glance toward the dining floor, then continued. "He gets visitors, once every 2 weeks, sometimes 3. They never come through the front, always the back entrance. I haven't gotten a clear look at their faces, but the way they carry themselves, the way they move through a space." He paused. "They're not restaurant people." Damien understood exactly what that meant. "And there's one more thing." Cal's voice dropped lower. "He asks about Sophie Hale, not about her work, not about her performance. He asks about her family, specifically about her father, who he was, what he did when he died." Damien set his glass down. Slowly. "Her father?" "Yeah." Cal nodded. "Like he's trying to confirm something. Or find something. I don't know which." Damien was quiet for a long moment. Around him the restaurant hummed on. The jazz, the laughter, the sound of a Friday night that had no idea anything was wrong. But inside his chest, something was pulling tight. The instinct of a man who had spent 15 years learning to read the space between what people said and what they meant. A restaurant manager had no reason to ask about a waitress's dead father. Damien left several bills on the bar and stood. Before he walked away, he spoke quietly to Hal without looking at him. "Keep watching. Anything moves, you call me immediately." Cal nodded and went back to his glasses. Damien walked out through the front door and stood in the cool night air of the parking lot. The city moved around him, indifferent, loud, bright. He stood still in the middle of it and looked back through the glass at the restaurant, and that was when he saw her again. Sophie Hale, standing at the register near the front, head slightly bowed, a loose strand of blonde hair fallen forward across her cheek. And then, as though she felt the weight of being watched, she lifted her eyes. The light hit them directly, and the memory came, not slowly, not gently. It came the way a wave comes when you've turned your back to the ocean, sudden and total and impossible to brace against. 10 years ago, Damien was 28. He had just closed a deal that would become the foundation of everything he would build. His first real victory, the one that proved to him the empire was possible. He was driving back from the meeting, running on no sleep and the particular kind of adrenaline that only comes once or twice in a lifetime, when the car left the road. He remembered the sound of it, the impact, the way the world tilted and then stopped making sense. And then through the smoke and the broken glass, a pair of hands, reaching in, pulling him out. Walter Hale, the security guard from his office building. A quiet man, solid. The kind of man who showed up every single day for 7 years and did his job without ever once asking to be noticed. Damien had walked past him hundreds of times, had never once stopped to learn his name, until the night Walter pulled him out of a burning car with his bare hands. Walter was badly hurt in the rescue, 3 months in the hospital, and by the time he was well enough to return to work, the company had restructured. His position was gone. Damien had been in the middle of building an empire. He had told himself he would find Walter, would make it right, would do something that actually meant something. He had never done it. Life moved fast when you were building something from nothing. 1 week became 1 month, became 1 year, became 10. And Walter Hale, the man who had pulled him out of the wreckage of a car with broken ribs and burning hands, had slowly faded from the front of Damien's mind to the back of it. And then further still, until he had almost convinced himself the debt had somehow been settled. It hadn't. He stood in the parking lot now, staring through the glass at Sophie Hale, at those pale green eyes, at the particular way she carried herself even under the weight of everything pressing down on her. And he understood with a certainty that left no room for doubt. She was Walter's daughter. He pulled out his phone and called Leon Shaw, his most trusted second. Leon picked up before the second ring. "Boss, Leon." Damien's voice was quiet and precise. "I need everything on a woman named Sophie Hale. She works at Ember. Father's name was Walter Hale. I need to know everything. Who she is, where she lives, what happened to her father. All of it." "How soon?" "Now." He ended the call and stood there in the dark, looking at the young woman on the other side of the glass, the daughter of a man who had saved his life and received nothing in return, working a double shift in his restaurant, being ground down by a manager he had hired, carrying a debt that should never have been hers to carry. 10 years. 10 years he had carried that unfinished thing in the back of his chest without ever giving it a name. He had a name for it now. Leon called back in 20 minutes. Damien was still in the parking lot when his phone buzzed. He answered before it finished the first ring. "Talk." Leon's voice was low and measured, the way it always was when what he had to say wasn't simple. "I found her, boss, and you're going to want to be sitting down for this." Damien said nothing, just waited. Sophie Hale, 26 years old, only child of Walter Hale. A pause. "It's all there, everything you suspected." Damien closed his eyes for just a moment. Her mother raised her alone after Walter died, worked herself down to nothing to keep Sophie in school. Then 6 years ago, cancer diagnosis. Terminal. She lasted 8 months. Leon's voice stayed even, professional, but something underneath it was careful. Left behind $140,000 in medical bills. Sophie dropped out of college in her 3rd year. Has been working ever since. Waitressing, grocery work, office cleaning. Started at Ember 9 months ago. The city moved around Damien, loud and indifferent, and completely unaware. 10 years, he said quietly, almost to himself. 10 years she's been out there alone. He thought about Walter Hale, about a quiet man who showed up every single day for 7 years and never once asked for anything. About 2 broken hands reaching through smoke and broken glass. About the way Damien had told himself he would make it right, and then let 10 years pass without making it anything at all. "There's more, boss." Leon's tone shifted, tightened. "About Reed Calloway. Damien opened his eyes. Say it. Reed Calloway isn't just a restaurant manager. He has direct ties to Marcus Vane. The name landed like something physical. Marcus Vane, a man Damien had not heard spoken out loud in 8 years. A man he had believed, had allowed himself to believe, was finished. Gone. No longer a problem that required his attention. Vane is supposed to be done, Damien said. His voice had gone very quiet. The kind of quiet that meant something entirely different from calm. He's not done, boss. Leon let that sit for a second before continuing. He pulled back 8 years ago when you outmaneuvered him. But he never stopped. He's been rebuilding quietly, new people, new structure, staying completely off the radar. Reed Calloway is one of his. Has been for years. Damien's hand tightened around the phone. And Sophie? That's the part you need to hear. Leon drew a slow breath. Vane knows who she is. He knows she's Walter Hale's daughter. He knows what Walter meant to you, or what he should have meant to you. And he arranged for her to be placed at Ember deliberately. The parking lot felt very still suddenly. He's been using her as leverage, Leon continued. Reed was put there to watch her, control her situation, keep her trapped. And from what I can piece together, Vane has a plan for her. He wants to use her to get to you. Force your hand on the Meridian portfolio, the acquisition you've been building toward for 2 years. Give him the stake he wants. Or Sophie Hale's life gets significantly worse in ways that will be very difficult to trace back to him. Damien stood completely still for a long moment. In his mind, every piece was settling into place. The picture it made was ugly and precise, and had clearly been planned by someone who understood exactly how to find the thing a man didn't know he was protecting, and use it against him. Boss, Leon's voice came back carefully. How do you want to handle this? Damien looked through the glass at the restaurant. At the Friday night crowd who had no idea. At Reed Calloway moving across the dining floor, with his hands clasped behind his back. At Sophie Hale setting a plate down at a corner table, and the way her hands, just for a moment, were not quite steady. Damien stood there for a moment longer than necessary. 10 years. She had been out there for 10 years. He exhaled, then he dialed Leon. Tonight, he said, deal with Reed. Clean, no noise. He paused. And find me everything on Vane's current operation. Location, structure, all of it. I want it by morning. Understood. He ended the call and walked back inside. He had one thing left to do tonight. He found her in the hallway near the service area. Sophie, alone for just a moment, pressing her back against the wall, with her eyes closed the way a person does when they are trying to gather enough of themselves to make it through the next hour. She didn't hear him approach. When she opened her eyes and saw him standing there, the customer from the corner table, the one who had been watching the room all evening, she straightened immediately, pulled herself back into the composure that 9 months of this job had made automatic. Can I help you, sir? This area is staff only. I know. Damien kept his voice gentle. I'm not here as a customer. I need to talk to you. Sophie looked at him carefully, wary in the way that someone becomes after a long time of learning that unexpected conversations rarely end well. About what? Damien took a slow breath. He had thought about how to say this on the walk back from the parking lot, had turned it over and found no version of it that didn't require simply saying the truth. I need to talk to you about your father. The effect was immediate. Sophie's face went completely still, the way a face does when something reaches past every defense a person has built and lands directly on the thing underneath. Her lips parted, her eyes widened, and then she took one step back until her spine met the wall behind her. "You knew my father?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I did." Damien held her gaze. "He worked in my building for 7 years, and I need to tell you something about him that I should have told you a long time ago. Every morning for 7 years, before I arrived, before anyone arrived, he left a cup of coffee on my desk. Black. The way I took it, I never once asked him to. He just noticed, and I never once thanked him for it." Sophie stared at him. "My father was a security guard. He died in an accident. My mother told me. Your mother was trying to protect you." Damien said it gently, but without softening what it meant. "Walter Hale didn't just die in an accident, Sophie. He was hurt saving my life." The hallway was quiet around them. Somewhere beyond it, the restaurant hummed on. Jazz, conversation, the sound of a normal Friday night that had no idea what was happening back here. Sophie didn't speak. She just looked at him with those pale green eyes that had stopped him cold in a parking lot 20 minutes ago, and waited. So Damien told her. He told her about the night 10 years ago, about the deal, the drive home, the moment the car left the road, about coming back to consciousness with smoke in his lungs and, man he barely knew, pulling him out with 2 hands that were already bleeding. He told her about Walter staying with him until the ambulance came, about the 3 months in the hospital, about the restructure that took his job while he was still recovering, and he told her the part that cost him the most to say out loud. "I told myself I would find him, make it right, do something that actually meant something." He stopped. For the first time that evening, for the first time in longer than he could honestly remember, Damien Cross didn't know what to do with his hands. He looked down at them for just a moment. The hands that had built 12 restaurants and closed 100 deals and never once shaken when they needed to be steady. "I never did," he said. "I kept building, kept moving. And I told myself that someday I would find him, and someday kept becoming next month, and next month kept becoming next year, and 10 years went by, and I never once picked up the phone." He looked up at her. "That is the thing I am most ashamed of, not the things I've done in business that people might call ruthless. This, a man pulled me out of a burning car with his bare hands, and I let him disappear into 10 years of my own busyness, like he was something I could get back to later." He didn't look away from her eyes when he said it. "There is no later. I know that now." Sophie's eyes had filled, not spilling over, held back with the same quiet discipline she had been using all night to hold everything else back. "But there, he never told us," she said. Her voice was very small. "He never said anything about saving someone. He came home one day and said he'd been in an accident at work, that he'd hurt his hands. He never said," she stopped, looked down at her hands for a moment. "He used to whistle when he thought no one was listening. The same song every time. I never knew what it was. I used to fall asleep to it when I was little." She paused. "I haven't heard it since he died, and I'm terrified I'm starting to forget what it sounded like." "That was who he was," Damien said quietly, "and that broke something." Not loudly. Sophie didn't collapse or cry out. She just exhaled. a long, slow breath that seemed to carry something she had been holding inside for a very long time. And then, carefully, she reached into the pocket of her uniform and took out her phone, opened it, turned it toward him. A photograph. Old, slightly faded at the edges. A man with kind eyes and a wide smile standing beside a small blonde girl who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. "That's him," Sophie said. "That's my dad." Damien looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out his own phone. Opened it. Turned the screen toward her. The same man, younger, in a security uniform, standing outside a building on a winter morning, squinting slightly against the light. It was the photo Damien had kept as his wallpaper, for reasons he had never fully examined, only knowing that some part of him had refused to let it go completely. Sophie looked at the screen, then at Damien, then back at the screen. "You kept it," she said. "I kept it." The tears came then. Not sobs, nothing like the broken sound he had heard from the break room earlier. Just tears moving quietly down her face in the way that grief sometimes does when it finally finds a door that someone has opened for it after a very long time. "He would have been proud of you," Damien said, "for everything you've carried, for the way you've carried it." Sophie shook her head slightly. "I haven't done anything remarkable. She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I just didn't want to give up." "That," Damien said, "is the most remarkable thing there is." They stood there for a moment in the quiet of the hallway. Two people connected by a decade of distance and a debt that had never been properly named. And something between them settled. Not resolved, not finished, but acknowledged finally in a way that changed the weight of it. And then footsteps, heavy, deliberate, moving down the hallway toward them with the particular rhythm of a man who wanted to be heard coming. Reed Calloway. He stopped several feet away, his eyes moving from Sophie to Damien and back again with the cold, assessing look of a man, calculating how much of a problem this was going to be. When he spoke, his voice carried the smooth, professional authority he used like a tool. "Sophie, sharp, clipped. Table 7 has been waiting for 12 minutes. I need you on the floor." Sophie's body responded before her mind could stop it. The instinct of 9 months of conditioning. Shoulders pulling in, chin dropping, the automatic preparation to comply. She had taken half a step before Damien spoke. "She's not going anywhere." Reed's eyes moved to Damien. Something shifted in them, a recalculation. "I'm sorry? You heard me." Damien's voice was completely level, the kind of level that doesn't need volume to carry weight. Reed drew himself up, took a step closer. "I don't know who you are, sir, but this is my restaurant and Sophie is my employee. I'd suggest you return to your table before I have security escort you out." Damien looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a card. He held it out, not to Reed, but simply out, so that Reed had to come to it. Reed took it, read it, and the color left his face with a speed that would have been almost satisfying if Damien had been in the mood to find anything satisfying right now. "I'm Damien Cross," Damien said quietly. "I own this restaurant. I own all 12 restaurants in this group. And I have spent the last 2 hours sitting in the corner of my own dining room watching you run this floor. And what I've seen is going to have consequences that I promise you have not yet begun to imagine." Reed's mouth opened, Nothing came out. "My office," Damien said. Now, Reed went, and before Damien followed, he turned back to Sophie one last time. She was standing against the wall, her eyes wide, the tears still drying on her cheeks, looking at him the way a person looks when the ground has shifted so completely beneath them that they are no longer sure which direction is up. "Wait here," he said. "This won't take long." And then he walked away down the hallway, toward the office at the end of it, where Reed Calloway was already waiting with the specific posture of a man who has just understood, too late, exactly how badly he has miscalculated. The office door closed behind them with a sound that felt very final. It wasn't a large room, a desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet along the wall, the kind of functional, unremarkable space that exists in every restaurant in the world, where schedules get made and complaints get filed and nothing of consequence is supposed to happen. Tonight was going to be different. Reed Calloway stood in the middle of the room with his hands clasped in front of him. The professional composure he wore on the dining floor had not entirely left him, but it was cracking at the edges now. Damien could see it in the way Reed's jaw was set just slightly too tight, in the way his eyes kept moving to the door and back. Damien didn't sit down. He stood on the other side of the desk and looked at Reed the way a man looks at something he has already made a decision about. "Mr. Mercer, Cross." Reed caught himself, adjusted. "I want to start by saying that whatever you think you observed tonight, I'm going to stop you there," Damien said quietly. Reed stopped. "I didn't come in here to listen to an explanation. I came in here to ask you one question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer it." Damien moved around the desk slowly, deliberately, until he was standing close enough that Reed had nowhere to look but at him. "How long have you been working for Marcus Vane?" The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Reed's composure didn't crack. It shattered. The color drained from his face in a single moment. Not gradually, not partially, but completely. The way it does when a person realizes that the ground they were standing on was never as solid as they believed. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I don't know what you're..." "The calls after your shift," Damien said, each word landing flat and precise. "The back entrance, the visitors every 2 weeks. The questions about Sophie Hale, about her father, about Walter." He tilted his head slightly. "You have one chance to answer correctly. I'd use it." Reed looked at him for a long moment, and then, slowly, completely, whatever was left of his resistance gave out. His shoulders dropped, his chin fell, and when he spoke, his voice had lost every trace of the authority it normally carried. 8 years, Reed said quietly. "I've worked for Vane for 8 years." Damien said nothing, waited. "He placed me here 14 months ago, when Sophie Hale applied for the position." Reed kept his eyes on the floor. "He told me to make sure she got the job, to keep her here, to keep her manageable." "Manageable," Damien repeated. He needed her in place, needed her dependent, needed her to have no options. Reed swallowed. "So that when the time came, when Vane was ready to move, he would have something to use against me." Reed nodded. "Just once. Barely." Damien was quiet for a moment. He moved to the window and stood with his back to Reed, looking out at the narrow alley behind the restaurant. A city that never stopped moving, completely unaware of what was being decided in a small office on the 14th floor of one of his buildings. "Where is Vane now?" he asked. Reed hesitated. Damien turned. "Just slightly. Just enough for Reed to see his face." Reed told him. He told him about the operation Vane had been running for 8 years from the outside. About the network of people placed carefully inside businesses Damien controlled. About the plan, the Meridian portfolio, the acquisition Damien had spent 2 years building toward, the stake Vane intended to force him to surrender. And then he told him the rest. About what Vane intended to do with Sophie if Damien refused. Damien listened to all of it without moving, without changing his expression. The kind of stillness that is not calm, that is something much colder than calm, and much more dangerous. When Reed finished, Damien walked to the door, opened it, and without turning back, took out his phone. "Leon." His voice was ice. "Reed Calloway is leaving the building in 10 minutes. Human Resources will process his termination tonight. Gross misconduct, full documentation." A pause. "Make sure someone meets him when he gets outside." He ended the call. "Mr. Cross." Reed's voice came from behind him. Thin, desperate. "Please, I have a—" "You made a choice," Damien said quietly. He still hadn't turned around. "Tonight you're living with it." He walked out and pulled the door closed behind him. Sophie was still in the hallway where he had left her. She had composed herself, straightened her uniform, pulled the loose strand of hair back from her face, assembled herself back into the version of herself that had learned to function under pressure. But her eyes, when they found his, were still carrying everything from the conversation they'd had, still open in a way they probably hadn't been with anyone in a very long time. "Is everything is handled," Damien said gently. "You don't have to worry about Reed Calloway anymore." Sophie looked at him. Something moved across her face. Relief, confusion, the look of someone who had been waiting for the blow so long they didn't know what to do when it didn't land. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. It was a simple question, honest, the kind that deserved an honest answer. "Because I owe your father more than I can ever fully repay," Damien said. "And because what has been happening to you in this building, in my building, should never have been allowed to happen." Sophie held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. Small, quiet, the nod of someone who is still processing something too large to fully absorb in a single night. Damien was about to speak again when his phone buzzed. Leon. He glanced at the screen, excused himself with a look, and stepped a few feet down the hallway. "Talk. We have a problem." Leon's voice had a quality Damien rarely heard in it, something close to urgency. "Vane isn't waiting. He's here." Damien went still. "Here. Ember." He came in through the front, walked in like a regular customer, made a reservation under a different name. "He's been sitting in the dining room for the last 40 minutes. A pause. "He knows you're here, boss. This wasn't a coincidence. He followed you in." Damien's jaw tightened. 8 years. 8 years of patience and careful positioning and waiting for exactly the right moment. And Marcus Vane had chosen tonight. This specific night, this specific restaurant, this specific hour, to make his move. "Keep eyes on him," Damien said quietly. "Don't move. Don't approach. I'm coming out." He put the phone away and turned back to Sophie. "I need you to do something for me," he said. His voice was calm, deliberate. "I need you to go to the back. Stay with Ryan. Don't come out onto the main floor until I come and find you personally. Can you do that?" Sophie read his face. She was sharper than people gave her credit for. He had already understood that. "What's happening?" "Something I need to take care of." He held her gaze. "You're safe, I promise you that. But I need you off the floor right now. A beat." Then she nodded, turned, moved quickly toward the back without another word. Damien straightened his jacket and walked out onto the dining floor. He saw Vane immediately. He was sitting at a table near the window. The best table in the room, of course, the one with the clearest view of the entire floor. He was 60 years old and looked like a man who had spent every one of those years getting exactly what he wanted. Silver-haired, immaculately dressed, a glass of red wine in front of him that he hadn't touched. He was looking directly at Damien when Damien came through the door, had been waiting for him, clearly, with the patient satisfaction of a man who had planned this moment for a very long time. Damien walked across the floor toward him. The restaurant moved around them. Jazz, candlelight, the sound of a Friday night that had no idea. He pulled out the chair across from Vane and sat down without being invited. Vane smiled. "Damien, Marcus, you look well." Vane glanced around the restaurant with something like appreciation. "Ember is beautiful. You've built something remarkable here. Truly, I mean that." Damien said nothing. Vane set his hands flat on the table. A deliberate gesture. Open, reasonable. The posture of a man who wanted to appear as though he was having a civilized conversation. "I think you know why I'm here." "The Meridian portfolio," Damien said. 30%, Vane said simply. "That's all I want. 30% of the Meridian acquisition, transferred cleanly, documented properly, no noise. You keep control. You keep everything else. I become a silent partner in one project, and we both walk away from tonight having avoided something very unpleasant. And if I don't..." Vane tilted his head slightly. "Then the young woman working in your restaurant, the one you've apparently taken quite an interest in this evening, finds herself in a situation that becomes considerably more difficult to manage. The debt she's carrying has certain pressure points that are very easy to activate. Her employment history has vulnerabilities that can be exploited in ways that make future employment very difficult. And the story of why she was really placed here." He paused. "Let it sit. Stories like that tend to become complicated for everyone involved." Damien looked at him across the table, at the face of a man who had spent 8 years building toward this single conversation, who had placed people inside his business, had engineered Sophie Hale's situation down to its finest details, had waited with the patience of someone who genuinely believed he had thought of everything. "You used her," Damien said. His voice was very quiet. "A young woman who has spent the last 2 years working 3 jobs to pay her dead mother's medical bills. And you put her in this restaurant deliberately, kept her trapped deliberately, made her life smaller deliberately, so that you could use her as a number in a negotiation." Vane's expression didn't change. "Business requires leverage. She is not leverage." The words came out with a weight that was not anger, something quieter than anger, and significantly more dangerous. "She is Walter Hale's daughter, and Walter Hale saved my life." Something moved in Vane's eyes then, just briefly. A recalculation. "I'm going to give you one opportunity," Damien said. Walk out of this restaurant tonight. Pull every person you have placed inside my organization. Dissolve whatever you've built around Sophie Hale's situation, completely and permanently. And do not ever put yourself in proximity to anything connected to me again." Vane studied him for a moment. Then the smile came back, thinner this time, less certain. "And if I decline your generous offer?" Damien reached into his jacket pocket and placed a single item on the table between them. A USB drive. "Leon has spent the last 3 hours pulling together 8 years of documentation," Damien said. "Financial records, communications, the placement of your people inside my organization, names, dates, methods, what was done to Sophie Hale and how it was orchestrated." He left the drive on the table. "Every relevant authority already has a copy. What happens next depends entirely on what you do in the next 60 seconds. The restaurant hummed around them. Jazz, candlelight. A Friday night in Midtown that had no idea. Marcus Vane looked at the USB drive for a long moment. Then he laughed, soft, almost impressed. "You prepared this before you even walked in tonight," he said. "It wasn't a question. I prepared it the moment Leon told me your name was connected to Reed Calloway," Damien said. 3 hours ago." Something shifted in Vane's eyes. The satisfaction, the 8 years of patient certainty, cracked. Just slightly. Just enough. He picked up his wine glass, took the first sip he'd taken all evening, set it down with the careful precision of a man who refuses to let anyone see his hands shake. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, and looked at Damien one last time, not with defeat, but with the particular expression of a man filing something away, storing it for later. "This isn't finished," Vane said quietly. "No," Damien said, "but tonight is." Vane walked toward the door without another word. Damien watched him go. He sat there for a moment longer than he needed to. The jazz kept playing. The candles kept burning. Nobody in that room had any idea what had just happened at this table. He thought about Walter Hale, about a man who had noticed how he took his coffee and never said a word about it, about 2 hands reaching through smoke and broken glass, about 10 years of a debt that had been sitting in the back of his chest like something he kept meaning to deal with. He thought, that ends tonight. Then he sat alone at the best table in the restaurant for a moment, in the middle of the jazz and the candlelight and the sound of a normal Friday night, and let out a slow breath. It wasn't over. Not completely. There would be lawyers and documentation and a process that would take months to fully resolve. He knew that. But tonight, in this room, it was done. He stood up and went to find Sophie Hale. Sophie hadn't stayed in the back. Damien found out when he turned the corner into the hallway. And Ryan Park was standing there alone, hands pressed flat against the wall behind him, looking like a man who had just watched something happen that he wasn't sure he should have let happen. "Where is she?" Damien asked. Ryan exhaled. "She heard. The dining room, the acoustics back here, you can catch pieces of conversation if you're standing in the right place. She heard enough." He paused. "I tried to stop her." Damien looked past him toward the dining floor. "She went out there herself," Ryan said quietly. "About 4 minutes ago." Damien moved. He came through the door onto the main floor and stopped. Sophie was standing at the far end of the room near the window, the table where Vane had been sitting. Vane was gone, but Reed Calloway was still there, being quietly escorted toward the back exit by two men Damien recognized as Leon's, and Sophie had stepped directly into their path. She wasn't blocking them. She wasn't making a scene. She was simply standing there, in her slightly wrinkled pink uniform, with her hair coming loose from its ponytail, looking at Reed Calloway with an expression that Damien had not seen on her face before. Not fear, not exhaustion, not the careful, contained composure she had been wearing all evening like armor. Something else entirely. Reed saw her and stopped. The two men on either side of him stopped with him. The restaurant had not gone quiet. The jazz still played. The other diners still talked. The Friday night still moved around them indifferently. But in that small radius, in that specific corner of the room, everything had gone very still. Sophie reached into the pocket of her uniform and placed something on the table beside her. A phone, screen up, a recording application open and running, timestamp visible, audio level bars moving steadily. 9 months, she said. Her voice was calm, quiet, but it carried. 9 months of double shifts that never showed up on my paycheck. 9 months of being told I had no choice. 9 months of... She stopped for just a moment, steadied herself, then continued. I kept a record. Every shift, every instruction you gave me that crossed a line, every conversation where you reminded me that I was replaceable and you weren't. She looked at him directly. I kept all of it. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, I think I always knew that one day I was going to need it. Reed stared at her. Something moved across his face. The last remnant of the authority he had carried for 9 months, dissolving in real time. Ryan helped me submit the documentation to the labor board 2 hours ago, Sophie continued, while you were in the office. She glanced briefly at Damien, just a glance, quick and steady, then back to Reed. Whatever happens next happens through the right channels, through the system, the way it's supposed to work. Nobody in that corner of the room said anything for a moment. Then Reed Calloway, the man who had spent 9 months telling a young woman she had no options, looked down at the phone on the table and looked away. Leon's men walked him out. Sophie stood where she was until the back door had closed behind them. Then she exhaled, long and slow, and her shoulders came down from where they had been held, high and tight, for longer than Damien could accurately calculate. He crossed the floor toward her. Ryan helped you, he said. Ryan has been helping me document things for 3 months, Sophie said. There was something almost like a smile at the edge of her voice. He was more frightened about it than I was, but he showed up every time. Damien looked at her, at this young woman who had spent 9 months being told she was powerless, and had spent that same 9 months quietly, carefully, building the evidence that would prove otherwise. You could have told me, he said. When I told you who I was, you could have handed all of it to me and let me deal with it. Sophie met his eyes. I know. Why didn't you? She was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the city moved, bright and indifferent and vast. When she spoke, her voice was considered, like she had thought about this before, not just tonight. Because it needed to be mine, she said. The debt is mine. The 9 months are mine. What Reed did, that happened to me, and I needed the way it ended to be mine too. She paused. Does that make sense? Yes, Damien said. It makes complete sense. Sophie looked down at the phone on the table, picked it up, slid it back into her pocket with the careful precision of someone returning something valuable to its proper place. "My father," she said. Not a question, just the words placed quietly into the air between them. "He never told you," Damien said. "No." She shook her head slowly. "He came home that night with his hands bandaged and told us he'd had a small accident at work, that he'd slipped on some ice near the entrance of the building. A small, complicated sound, not quite a laugh, not one. He was very convincing. My mother believed him completely. I believed him completely." She looked up. That was who he was. He did the thing, and then he went home and had dinner and didn't mention it again. Damien thought about Walter Hale. About a man who had pulled someone out of a burning car with broken ribs and bleeding hands, and then gone home and told his family he'd slipped on some ice. "He was a better man than most people I've ever known," Damien said. And he meant it in a way that had nothing to do with sentiment. He meant it the way you mean something when you have spent 10 years measuring other people against it and finding them wanting. Sophie looked at him for a long moment. The restaurant moved around them. The jazz played on. "What happens now?" she asked. It was the same question she had been asking herself for 2 years. Damien understood that. He had heard it underneath everything else all evening, in the way she gripped the edge of a table to keep herself standing, in the way she had kept a 9-month record on a phone in her uniform pocket because she refused to accept that this was simply how things were going to be. "Now," Damien said, "a few things change." He reached into his jacket and produced an envelope. He held it out to her. Sophie looked at it, didn't take it immediately. "What is it?" "The debt," he said simply. $140,000. Settled in full as of this morning. I had Leon arrange it before I came in tonight, once I understood who you were." He kept the envelope extended. "This isn't charity. Your father worked for my organization for 7 years. What's in that envelope is what he was owed, what should have been taken care of a long time ago, and wasn't because I failed to do what I should have done." Sophie stared at the envelope. Something crossed her face. The look of someone who had needed this for so long they had stopped believing it would ever come. "I can't," she started. "It was never mine to keep," Damien said quietly. "It belongs to you. It always did." A long moment passed. Then Sophie reached out and took the envelope. She held it in both hands, not opening it, just holding it, and looked down at it the way a person looks at something they are still not entirely sure is real. Her jaw was set tight. Her eyes were bright. She didn't cry. She had cried enough tonight, in a break room, alone. This was something different. This was the other side of something. "I want to go back to school," she said. Her voice was steady. "I was studying journalism. 3rd year. I had a professor who told me I was good at it." She stopped, started again. "I had to leave a lot of things behind when my mum got sick. I'd like to go back and find some of them." "Then do that," Damien said. Sophie looked up at him. Something in her eyes had shifted, was still shifting in real time. The particular look of a person watching a horizon change. "Just like that? Just like that?" She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked down at the envelope in her hands. Then back up. "My father saved your life," she said. "Yes. And you spent 10 years not knowing what to do about that." "Yes, and now you do." Damien looked at her. at Walter Hale's daughter standing in the middle of his restaurant in a slightly wrinkled pink uniform with an envelope in her hands and 10 years of someone else's unfinished business finally, after everything, beginning to resolve itself, and said, "Now I do." 3 months later, Sophie Hale walked back into a classroom for the first time in 2 years. She sat in the third row, second seat from the left, the same seat she had always chosen, close enough to hear everything, far enough from the front that she could think without feeling watched. The professor was different from the one she remembered. The syllabus was different. The textbooks had a new edition. But the feeling of sitting in that room, of having somewhere to be that was entirely her own, that nobody could take from her, that she had earned and chosen and fought her way back toward, that feeling was exactly as she had remembered it. Better, maybe, because this time she understood what it had cost. She pulled out a notebook, uncapped a pen, and wrote the date at the top of the first page. Outside the window, the city moved the way it always did, indifferent, enormous, completely unaware of the small, significant things happening inside it at any given moment. Sophie looked at it for just a second. Then she turned back to the front of the room and began. 6 weeks after the night at Ember, Sophie was in the middle of a study session when her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number. She almost didn't pick up. "Miss Hale," a man's voice, direct, unhurried. "This is Leon Shaw. I work with Damien Cross. I'm calling to let you know that the Walter Fund has been established this morning. You're the first recipient. Full details are in your email." A pause. "If you have questions, call me." He hung up. Sophie sat there with the phone still against her ear for a moment after the call ended. Then she lowered it slowly and opened her email. She read it once, then again, then a third time, not because she hadn't understood it, but because some things need to be read more than once before they become real. The Walter Fund, established in honor of Walter Hale, for the children of working-class employees, security staff, kitchen workers, maintenance crews, the people who hold things up without anyone noticing. Her father's name, on something real, something that would keep existing long after everyone who had known him was gone. Sophie set her phone face down on the desk. She didn't call Ryan. She didn't call anyone. She just sat there in the quiet of her small apartment. The same apartment, the same view of the building across the alley, the same radiator that made noise at 3 in the morning. And let it settle over her, the way only the most important things settle. Slowly, completely, without any need to be spoken out loud. Walter Hale, security guard, husband, father, the man who saved someone's life and went home and said he slipped on some ice. He had a fund now. It wasn't enough. She knew that. But it was true. And it was lasting. And it had his name on it. Outside the window, the city moved the way it always did. Indifferent, enormous, unaware. Sophie picked up her pen, opened to a fresh page, and at the top, in her own handwriting, wrote 2 words. Walter Hale, the first line of the first story she was ever going to tell. On a Thursday evening 3 weeks after that, Ember closed at 11. The last customers left. The kitchen wound down. The staff collected their things and moved toward the exit in 1s and 2s, the way they always did at the end of a long Friday. Tired and loose, and already thinking about something other than work. Sophie stayed behind. She had come back to Ember, Not because she needed the job anymore, not because she had no other options, but because Ryan was still there and the new manager was someone she had been asked to help orient, and because, in a way she hadn't expected, the place meant something to her now that it hadn't before. Not as a trap, as a thing she had survived. There was a difference. She was stacking the last of the chairs when she heard footsteps at the door. Damien Cross, out of his jacket, white shirt open at the collar, looking, for the first time since she had met him, like a man who was not in the middle of managing something. "You're late," Sophie said. "I'm exactly on time." He looked around the restaurant, quiet now, chairs up, candlelight gone, just the low working lights left on over the bar. "I like it better like this." "Empty?" "Honest," he said. Sophie set the last chair up and came around the bar. She had started making tea at the end of shifts, a habit she'd picked up from her mother, who had believed that the right cup of tea at the right moment could resolve almost anything. She put the kettle on without asking and pulled 2 cups from the shelf. Damien sat on one of the bar stools. He looked at the room around him. His room, his restaurant, the place he had built, with the particular expression of a man seeing something familiar through eyes that have recently been adjusted. "How is school?" he asked. "Good." Sophie set a cup in front of him, hard. "Good," she considered. "My professor told me this week that I write like someone who has something to say. I'm not sure if that was a compliment." "It was," Damien said. Sophie looked at him. "You sound certain." "I am certain." He wrapped his hands around the cup. "People who have nothing to say write around things. You write at them." Sophie was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the city was doing what it always did, moving, bright, relentless, enormous. She looked at it and thought about her father, the way she did at the end of most days, not with grief anymore, or not only with grief, with something more complicated and more sustainable. Pride, gratitude, the particular tenderness that comes with understanding someone more fully after they are gone than you were able to while they were here. "I've been thinking about writing something," she said. "About him, about people like him." She turned her cup slowly in her hands. The people who hold things up without anyone noticing. The security guards and the kitchen staff and the maintenance workers and all of them. The people that buildings couldn't function without, that businesses couldn't run without, that other people's lives couldn't work without, and who almost never get a story told about them that treats them like the main character. Damien looked at her. "Your father," he said, "would have been extremely uncomfortable with that idea." "I know." Something moved at the corner of her mouth. He would have said he was just doing his job and that I should write about something important. The almost smile widened slightly. "Which is exactly why I'm going to do it." Damien was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'd read it." Sophie looked at him. She thought about what Ryan had said to her once, months ago, on a night that felt very far away now. He knows she has no choice, so he makes sure she never gets one. She thought about Reed Calloway and the recording on her phone and the labor board documentation and the particular satisfaction of having done it the right way, through the system, through the process, in a way that couldn't be undone or argued with or taken from her. She thought about her mother, who had worked herself down to nothing and left behind a debt and a daughter who was stronger than either of them had known. She thought about her father, who had saved a man's life and gone home and said nothing about it, who had understood in the way that some people quietly understand without ever articulating it, that the measure of a person is not whether they are recognized. It is whether they show up. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes, that night when you first heard me, in the break room." She looked at him steadily. "If you hadn't recognized my eyes, if there had been nothing there that reminded you of my father, would you still have stayed?" Damien considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. He didn't answer immediately. He sat with it for a moment, the way a person sits with a question they want to answer honestly rather than well. "I'd like to think so," he said finally. "I'd like to think that what I heard in that hallway would have been enough on its own." He paused. "But I'm not certain, and I think not being certain about that is something I need to keep sitting with." Sophie looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Once, slowly, the nod of someone who has just heard the most honest thing a person can say. "Not I would have, but I'm not sure, and I think that matters. My father would have liked you," she said, "eventually, after he decided you were worth the effort." Damien's expression shifted, just slightly. The way it did when something landed somewhere real. "That," he said quietly, "might be the best thing anyone has said to me in a long time." They sat there, in the quiet of the empty restaurant, in the honest light of a place after closing, with 2 cups of tea going slowly cold between them. And outside the window the city kept moving, the way it always did, enormous and indifferent and full of people carrying things that nobody else could see. Some of those people would find someone who stopped to listen. Some of them wouldn't. That was the thing about the world. It didn't distribute its attention fairly, and it never had, and pretending otherwise helped no one. But sometimes, in a hallway, on a Friday night, in a restaurant full of people who had no idea what was happening 30 feet away from them, sometimes a person stopped, not because they had to, not because it was convenient, but because some sounds, the particular sound of someone trying very hard not to be heard, reach past everything a person has built around themselves and land somewhere that still knows how to listen. Damien Cross had stopped, and everything that followed had come from that. Not all debts can be repaid. Some are too large. Some have been carried too long. Some involve people who are no longer here to receive what they were owed. But they can be honored in the way you treat the people who are still here, in the names you put on things that last, in the choice, made quietly, without announcement, to see the person in front of you as exactly that. A person, not a number, not a problem, not a resource to be managed or a variable to be controlled. A person with a story and a name and a father who showed up every single day and never once asked to be remembered. Walter Hale, he was remembered. And that is where we leave them. Not with everything fixed, not with anything grand, just 2 people, 2 cups of tea gone cold, and a name on something that will last longer than either of them. And so, does every person like him. In every building, every restaurant, every workplace where someone is quietly holding everything together tonight and hoping that somewhere somebody notices. If this story reminded you of someone like that, leave their name in the comments. We read every single one. And those names matter more than you know. If you're new here, this is Quiet Heroes. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. And to everyone who stayed until the end, thank you. More stories are waiting for you on the screen right now. We'll see you in the next one.